So this is our opening lecture on Ronald Reagan's "Touch the Face of God" speech, which is, hands down, really one of the, I'm going to say, the greatest, great speech that I've seen in my lifetime. That I remember this speech. I was I watched it on TV. In fact, all these events I saw on TV. So just to start with, I do need to make clear I don't like this guy. I'm not a fan of Reagan at all. I'm just not. So to include him in here, I think, is actually a big deal for me, right? To recognize that a person who politically I think is not my favorite, but that hands down the guy gave one of the greatest speeches ever. I think is really, really important. So let's talk about what happened. We're talking about probably one of the most significant, accidents in the space program in U.S. history. I mean, since then, of course, we have had, another space shuttle accident. Before that, we had both the Apollo 13 crisis in flight and also Apollo 8 that exploded on the ground. So, I mean, this is not our only space tragedy that we've had, but it was an incredibly big deal in 1986, and in no small part, it was because of who was on the flight that made it such a big deal. All 7 of the astronauts aboard were killed. But when we say that, we have to put this caveat in there because there are actually only technically 6 astronauts on the flight and 1 space flight participant named Krista McAuliffe. Krista McAuliffe was not an astronaut. She was a teacher of social studies, actually, from Concord, New Hampshire. And her being on that flight had a lot to do with why Reagan's need to give the oratory that he gave. So, okay. The United States had not put people into space between 1975 and 1981, if I'm getting my facts straight. In 1981, the United States rolled out the Space Shuttle program, which was a really big deal. I mean, you can see, you're pretty familiar with the Space Shuttle. You've seen it. This is not a startling and new image for you. But it was new in 1981. Before 1981, the rocket was really the height of technology for space travel. But the thing is about the rocket is that this is a launch you up and then you kind of fall back to Earth, right, in your pod that's up there. Almost all of this material is lost and you don't get to reuse it again. That's a big deal. The space shuttle, with its airplane-like design, is a reusable, space flight and re-entry vehicle that can be used over and over again. And this is considered vital to really, and the belief was among, many people was that space flights would now become much more part of our culture, that we would spend a lot more time taking people and materials up to space, and that this was going to have a huge transformative effect on American life, and that we would become kind of the image of the future that we had been telling ourselves we were headed for a very long time. But after some initial excitement in 81, the space shuttle program once again lost sort of American interest. We just weren't captured by the space program anymore. So enter this guy, and Reagan was a strong supporter of NASA and the space program generally, in part because Reagan was a believer in strategic defense initiative, which is sometimes called Star Wars, or the idea that the global security would benefit from a network of satellites that would surround the Earth and use laser beams to target ballistic missiles, right? So that if the Soviet Union attacked us with nuclear warheads, we'd shoot their rockets out of the sky. And good or bad, right or wrong, what you think of Reagan isn't really important at this juncture. The only thing that matters is that this was a really big deal to Reagan and a really big deal to a lot of people in his administration. So Reagan is a strong supporter of the space program. So what's he going to do, right? You've got a problem with a space program that people just don't care about anymore, and that most people, remember, the economy is not super healthy in the 1980s. A lot of people are out of work. A lot of people are seeing their real value of their wages decline. And so the idea of sinking billions upon billions of dollars into a space program really maybe was something that a lot of people weren't behind. So Reagan's got to deal with this. And the way that he deals with it is the TISP, the Teacher in Space Project. And this is, hands down, one of the most brilliant PR moves I think we've ever seen, at least in American history, and at least with the space program, right? So in August of 1984, Reagan announces this program, that we're going to put a teacher in space. 40,000 applications are mailed out, 11,000 of them are eventually completed and returned, and then we've got to select from these 11,000 nominees who is going to be our number one and then our backup number two, right? And the way that the NASA does it, I think, is really, really brilliant. And in part because what they do is they kick it back to state boards of education to decide who the people that represent that state, who are going to be your two nominees from your state to fly on the space shuttle. And the effect of this overall, right, if you're a student in school in the 1980s, is that you saw on TV a teacher in your district, right, or in your state, or in your town, or maybe even your school, is being interviewed because they're one of these finalists. They're one of the 11,000, or they've gotten through this round of it, right? It's showing up on the news with regularity. It's really heightening this excitement in the space program again, especially from young people. And that was exactly the purpose of the TISP program, was to increase kind of public support for NASA. Like I said, it's a brilliant PR move. I think of it as kind of like the American Idol of the 1980s, right? Where, we're selecting these candidates and the numbers getting down and down and down, and eventually we get down to the one, and oh my gosh, it's Kristen McAuliffe, and it's going to be so great. So this heightened, this heightened, attention, means that there's a lot of people watching TV when 73 seconds into the flight, the space shuttle blows up. A faulty O-ring led to a fuel leak. That fuel ignited and led to a tank rupture, which then became, a catastrophic failure, and the shuttle exploded. So Reagan's going to come on TV, and actually he comes on TV to give. He's scheduled to be appearing on all of the major networks because he's going to be delivering the State of the Union address that night. He cancels the State of the Union address and instead gives a speech on the tragedy. And he's got two things that he's dealing with, right? And exigencies are often set up in ways that we have competing exigencies that are in competition with one another, and are often such that to go after one eliminates the other. The first thing Reagan's got to do, right, is deal with the tragedy. People have died. They died on television. Little kids were watching. And the three times, I can think of 3 times in my lifetime when everything stopped and everybody just became glued to their TV sets, right? When Reagan was shot in 1983, the Space Shuttle Challenger in 1986, and the attacks on the World Trade Center in 2001. Those are the 3 times in my lifetime that I can remember when just everything stopped and people were glued to their TVs going, what's going on? Oh my gosh, right? This is this moment of crisis, in which Reagan is going to address. And so, this is the moment. But he has a second exigence, right? Come on, you've got a public that really doesn't support the space program, at least not, with much enthusiasm. And all of a sudden now we have this tragedy. I mean, the space shuttle program itself and NASA, are on the line here. There's a real good chance that neither of those things will exist, at the end of this whole crisis. So Reagan's very concerned. Remember, to him, the space shuttle program, the idea of bringing up satellites and human beings, working in space, is vital to his perceived need for global security. The audience of the speech is important too, and I think it's something that we should think about. The American people and their families, obviously, but specifically children. Remember, this is about a teacher, and so a lot of schools were very, very interested in following what was going on. There was probably somebody in your district that was being considered for the space shuttle, for the TISP program, right? And so, kind of that carryover of your enthusiasm that maybe it'll be, my physics teacher. The physics teacher at the high school I went to was one of the 2 finalists. I was not in high school at the time. I was in junior high, but that's not the point, right? But so everybody's interested, right? That could have been our math teacher that's going up on that shuttle. So we're all watching the TV, and it's a lot of hubbub and a lot of hubbub-loo, and it was, lots of people are watching, and many of them are children. And so Reagan has that special, aspect of the audience, right? So the constraints, though, are unique, and this is, I think, really important. I had considered using the Touch the Face of God speech in our section on eulogy, because it's obviously a eulogy, right? But I think that it demonstrates more of the aspects of crisis rhetoric in a number of senses. But in particular, Reagan's got this double, problem that he's got to deal with, right? On one hand, he's got to respect the dead. That's where you're going to get a lot of that kind of they're heroes. It's a great morning. We're all super sad. Those kind of elements of his rhetoric are important. But at the same time, we've got to have that continued support for the shuttle program. We've got to balance these two competing interests, and how does he do that? And I think that the way that Reagan does it is really brilliant. In that what he does is he uses this metaphor, the myth of the pioneer. And I think that that is really what kind of makes this speech really great. It's not just that he has some great lines. It's not just that he, delivers it really, really well. It's the use of this pioneer metaphor to balance these two competing interests, the need to mourn with the need to push on with the space program, that I think is really, really crucial, and it's one of the brilliant aspects of this particular oratory. So, I'm going to end it there. Obviously we're going to have some other lectures come up, but I think that this is really where we're going to call it, and I think that's the starting point for any study of the Challenger disaster. So, thanks.